Chapter 1. The clink of an antique brass bell and the unmistakable mustiness of used books. These were two of Esme's favourite things in the whole world. Notable other inclusions: notebooks, coffee, and the smell of earth after it rained. Today was a winning day because all five were in her presence. On days like this, she could easily conceive of working at the Goldsteins' bookshop forever. Esme took a deep breath. She had a bad habit of forgetting to breathe when she was excited or nervous about something. Right now, she was excited. The latest delivery of books had arrived right on time, her cafetiere was ready to pour, and the rain outside had slowed to a drizzle. As she opened the front door, the bell clinked and the smell of petrichor filled her nose. Lifting the box whilst tutting at the fact that they had left it on the damp step, she headed back inside and into the back room where all the deliveries were sorted. Odd, Esme thought. This delivery was once again light. They had been coming in drifts and drabs the past few weeks, and she wasn't sure why. She turned towards the sideboard where the cafetiere sat and poured the coffee into her favourite mug. She had set aside a small jug of milk earlier, and there was a never-ending supply of sugar cubes in this place. A splash of milk, the plop of the sugar cube, and she was ready to dive into her delivery. Esme put on her work gloves as she began to sort through the contents of the box. The usual suspects were here: leather-bound volumes of Shakespeare, Chaucer, Dickens, even some of the Bronte sisters. She loved that centuries on, people still loved these works, and that these editions were in circulation. Some of them were a little worse for wear, but would be snatched up by collectors nonetheless. Esme knew, for example, that Mrs. Dubert dear, not Dubhair, she could hear the indignation in her voice even now from the one time she mispronounced her name. With her long-haired chihuahua, who was possibly older than Esme's own 35 years, would be in the following week to purchase Chaucer. Beginning with the first book, Esme made careful notes about the title, author, and condition in the inventory notebook she used to keep track of deliveries. She held in her hands an illustrated version of the collected works of Charles Dickens, complete with a small portrait of the illustration of the man himself on the front. The brown leather was cracked in places, but the pages themselves were in as good a condition as you would expect for their age, circa late 1880s. Beyond the usual suspects, though, lay something very different, a notably oversized book. The cover was a rich burgundy colour which had faded a little, but still looked to be in good condition. It also had a lock of some sort, but the lock had no keyhole. It appeared to be made of a kind of pewter, but like the cover, it exhibited very few signs of wear and tear for a book that was clearly old. Esme was deeply lost in thought about what sort of book it could be, and where it had come from, when the doorbell rang. The unmistakable old-fashioned clinking brought her attention back to the present in a flash. "It's only me," came the familiar voice of her boss, Mr. Goldstein. He and his wife had owned the antique bookshop for over 30 years. Esme had been working here for at least half of that. Shelves lined with forgotten books in search of new owners that threatened to collapse under their weight, the pervasive musty smell that no manner of cleaning could erase, the threadbare rugs that were possibly older than the Goldsteins themselves. This was home. Esme hurried toward the front of the shop, placing her gloves carefully on the sideboard as she went to greet him. As he approached the counter, she noticed that his usual cheery demeanour had been replaced by something else. Worry, concern. She had seen that look for a few weeks now, but he had assured her everything was fine. As he placed his beaten leather briefcase on the counter, though, she knew it wasn't. Turning toward her, he began, "Esme, I'm afraid I have some rather unfortunate news to share." Her stomach felt as though it had dropped to her knees and a hot flash came over her. Mr. Goldstein had never, ever uttered those words to her in all the years she'd worked here. Not even when Mrs. Goldstein had taken a tumble last year and had to go to the hospital. What could be worse than that? "I'm sure you've noticed that things have been a little quiet around here lately," he said. Esme had noticed, but it was January, which was hardly their busiest month. Thinking about it though, December had been quieter than she had ever seen before. That was normally their busiest month, when customers were far more willing to splurge on first editions and the rarer antique books that otherwise remained on the shelves for most of the year. "Well, yes, but," she replied, her thoughts coming back to the present. "I've just returned from the bank," he continued, bringing a handkerchief to his brow. "It's not good news, I'm afraid." Okay, this was getting serious. Her anxiety was growing by the second at the thought of what he would say next. "Esme, there's no easy way to say this, but I'm afraid we have to let you go. I've accepted an offer from the bank to forgive our debt, but that means that this," he said, glancing around with his hands outstretched, "now belongs to them, and they have no intention of keeping any of us employed or keeping it as a bookshop." Esme looked at him. His face was pained and tears were forming in his eyes, but he was never one to cry. Instead, he simply walked over to the large gilded mirror that hung on the wall and smoothed out his shirt before adjusting his tie, despite it being perfect. His words played on repeat in her mind. "We have to let you go. We have to let you go. We have to let you go." Alongside this were imaginings of her newly unemployed life, whereby she never left her sofa and spent her days drinking endless cups of tea as she trawled the classifieds for a new job. A lump began to form in her throat and her breathing quickened whilst her mind raced with questions for which she had no answers. What will I do now? This is all I've ever known. What's going to happen to the Goldsteins? Esme took a deep breath and brought her hands together, trying to remain composed. She may be losing her job, but they were losing their entire livelihood, not to mention the apartment above the shop, which was their home. "I'm so sorry," she said, the words sounding like a whisper as she struggled to get them out. "Me too, Esme. This was our life, our dream. We opened over 40 years ago, just a few £100 and a box of books to our name. And now..." His voice choked up. Like Esme, the words were stuck. Neither of them wanted this to be true. "How long?" she asked, hoping it wasn't too direct a question to ask in his broken state. He sighed, turning away from the mirror and looking down at the tattered rug that sat in front of the counter before looking back up at her. 1 week. Everything and everyone has to be out by then. Chapter 2. The rest of the day had passed in a blur. Only a handful of people had entered the shop since Mr. Goldstein had returned, and Esme was entirely on autopilot the whole time. She found herself continuing to ask people how she could help, whether they were looking for something in particular, and other sorts of questions that she used to engage customers. But it all felt false. The shop was closing. It didn't matter if she helped them find their dream book or the perfect gift anymore. It was all pointless. Her mind was still going 10 to the dozen, predicting what would happen next. So far, she had imagined every kind of scenario, from working in a chain bookstore with new books that smelled of nothing in particular, going to college to train for something else, and of course, the scenario her brain found the most convincing, her never finding another job ever again, and simply withering away in her apartment. It was Friday evening, and that meant only one thing: ordering her favourite takeaway meal from the local Chinese restaurant. Even though she would be out of a job in a week, Esme saw no reason to deviate from her usual routine. She needed this more than ever. She took the same route she always did. Stepping out of the shop door and onto the cobbled street, she was careful, as always, not to roll her ankle on that one cobble that stuck out a little too much as she turned to her left. Continuing down the street, she went past the coffee shop that was covered almost entirely by wisteria, which always intrigued her, but she had yet to venture inside. At the end of the street, she paused to check for traffic before crossing at the pedestrian crossing. Looking ahead, Esme could see the familiar sign for the Lotus Chinese restaurant. The Lotus had opened a few years before she started working at the Goldstein's bookstore. It was owned by the parents of a girl she had gone to school with, Lana. They had never exactly been friends, but she had never been unkind to her either, unlike most of the girls at their school. St. Helens Conservatory was a private all-girls school that was highly oversubscribed. It wasn't unusual to hear stories of families uprooting their entire lives to move into a property nearby just so their daughter could attend. Esme had never really fit in. Her tuition was paid for by an inheritance left by her father. Aside from that, she and her mother were hardly well off. The girls at school knew this and had mocked her relentlessly for it. Except Lana. As Esme approached the door, she could see there was only one other person waiting. She pushed the door open and approached the counter to begin ordering, but Lana beat her to it. "Right on schedule," Lana spoke, barely looking up from the order pad she was scribbling on. Esme could feel her pulse quickening like it always did around Lana. She watched as a strand of hair fell from the messy bun Lana always had her hair up in when she was working. And Esme had to resist the urge to gently tuck it behind her ear. Even with a strand falling haphazardly across her face, Lana was beautiful. The person Esme had seen from the outside was a burly-looking man who was sitting on the somewhat flimsy plastic garden chairs that customers could sit on whilst they waited for their food. Esme wasn't sure why they had never bought actual proper chairs. Maybe it was intentional. They were horrible to sit on for any length of time, so you were incentivized to take your order and leave the minute it was ready. As she stood awkwardly near the counter, Esme could hear Lana's dad shouting something in Mandarin, to which Lana rolled her eyes but didn't say anything. "Your old man having a go at you again?" the burly man asked, his face breaking out into a smile that instantly made Esme more comfortable. She looked at Lana, who was doing her best not to laugh. "Why do you always think he's mad at me?" Lana asked. "I don't know, he just sounds pissed," the man replied. They laughed the way that people sharing an inside joke did. Esme had no idea how these two knew each other, but they were clearly good friends. Esme took the brief pause in their conversation as her cue to order. "Can I get," she began, "brown rice, tofu and black bean sauce, salt and pepper mixed vegetables, and a portion of spring rolls?" She rattled off her order far quicker than Esme had even thought it. "Yes, please, thank you," she replied quietly, tapping her card on the payment machine. Without a second look, Lana walked to the back where the kitchen was and grabbed 2 large plastic carrier bags. "Your food's ready," she called to the burly man who had been hovering at the end of the counter next to Esme. He grabbed the bags and looked quickly in each. "No fortune cookies. I'm hurt." Lana walked to the end of the counter and bent down. Not a second later, she stood up and proceeded to hurl a handful of cookies at him. They both broke out into a fit of laughter. He caught several of the cookies, which was pretty impressive. Carefully picking up the rest from the floor, he gave one to Esme. "In case she tries to sting you as well," he smiled. "Go home and practice," Lana yelled, still giggling as he tipped his baseball cap and left the shop. Esme stood there, dumbfounded by the whole situation. She held the cookie in her hand, running her thumb over it repeatedly. Maybe the cookie knew the solution to her problems. You do know there's a whole world of vegetarian dishes beyond spring rolls and tofu and black bean sauce, right? Well, yes, Esme replied, Lana's voice bringing her back to the present. Which is why I'm throwing in a little something extra, just for you. You can tell me all about how delicious it was when you come in next week, Lana smiled. You don't have to do that, really, Esme replied. Of course I do. You're one of my favourite people after all. Speaking of trying new things, did you know there's also a whole world beyond working at a dusty second-hand bookshop that no one under the age of 60 even goes to? She knew, but how? Also, did Lana just say favourite people, not just a customer? Maybe Esme's feelings weren't as one-sided as she thought. She quickly pushed that thought aside, like she had been doing for the past decade at least. Better not to get her hopes up. Well, I guess I'm about to find out, but you knew that already, didn't you? Esme replied. She couldn't explain how she knew that Lana knew about her predicament. She just did. All the shop owners know one another around here. Word gets around. Plus, it's hardly a surprise, is it? I wasn't kidding about no one under the age of 60 shopping there. It's always empty, Lana replied. We have customers, Esme replied, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. Lana gave her a look that could only be described as pitiful before she headed back to the kitchen and returned with a small plastic bag. She was just about to place it on the counter when she stopped and looked Esme straight in the eye. Did you know I've worked here just as long as you've worked for the Goldsteins? No, I didn't, Esme replied, surprising herself. How had she not realised that before? There's a key difference, though, beyond this being a restaurant and whatnot. Uh-huh. Lana leaned in closely to Esme, as if to make sure she were listening. She had been, but was now distracted by the close-up view of Lana's perfectly winged eyeliner and smoky eye. Esme held her gaze for a few seconds. Any more than that, she was certain Lana would see her cheeks flushing, and she would know how she felt. Esme had kept her feelings locked up all this time. She wasn't about to tell Lana how she had been pining for her since high school. I know I deserve more, Lana said, her smile softening as she did. Esme was taken aback, to say the least. The words stung because they were true, and she hated having to admit that to herself. Same job, same apartment, same everything. Since school. She had followed the path laid out for her whole life seemingly reduced in that moment to a check-off to-do list. Lana handed her a piece of paper, a flyer. You should come, she smiled. Esme looked at the piece of paper. It was awash with band logos, a picture of a stage, and large text in a word art style font that read Battle of the Bands. She knew Lana played, well, everything. Lana could learn any instrument she turned her hand to. She had always been in demand for productions at school, and Esme was certain she had sung numerous times at the Christmas time fair that they held every year to raise money for local charities. I'll think about it. Less think, more do. My band is playing. In all the years she'd been coming here, Lana had never mentioned being in a band. Esme had never thought to ask her about, well, anything. It wasn't that she didn't care. She had just never been very good at making friends. She never knew the right thing to say or to ask, like all the other kids did. She stuck with the only friends she knew, the ones found in her books and later TV shows and films. Chapter 3. It was Monday, the beginning of the end. Esme decided to head into the local coffee shop on her way to the Goldsteins. They were all going to need coffee this morning. She never deviated from her walk to work. She hadn't even been to this coffee shop before, since it had only opened in the past few months. It had previously been a cafe of some sort, but she hadn't been in there either, so she couldn't quite remember. Pushing open the door, Esme was met with the rich scent of coffee and the unmistakable smell of fresh baking. Wafts of spicy cinnamon, warm vanilla, and buttery caramel headed straight for her, making her stomach rumble. She had eaten breakfast, but not this breakfast. Crumbly, flaky pastries looked at her from behind the glass case, asking to come home with her. Croissants, pain au chocolat, cinnamon rolls. "What can I get for you?" the man behind the counter asked, turning away from the coffee machine where he was busy making another order. With his floppy dark hair, chunky framed glasses, and septum piercing, he was every inch the hipster barista that she associated with independent coffee shops like this. Can I get 3 lattes, please?" Esme replied. "Would you like to try our new spiced latte?" he asked. Okay, just one of them, please." As she looked down at the counter, Esme saw a familiar looking flyer. It was the same one Lana had given her for Battle of the Bands. She picked it up and started reading. "You going?" he asked. "Oh, I'm not sure," she replied. "You should check it out. Thanks It Has Pockets is playing, and they are incredible," he enthused. Esme surmised that Thanks It Has Pockets must be a band of some sort. She liked the name and could empathise with the need for more women's clothing to have pockets. "Here you go. I put an S on the spice one so you know which is which," he continued. "Thanks," she replied, grabbing the to-go holder and walking carefully toward the exit. As she approached the door, an older man who was just about to enter held it open for her. Esme noticed he had soft, tousled blonde curls and was wearing a pale-coloured suit that wouldn't have looked out of place in Edwardian times. She was convinced that the bookshop would be his next stop. "Thank you," she replied as she stepped outside. It was late summer, and whilst the temperature was still warm and the air humid, the plane trees were slowly changing and getting ready for the approaching autumn season. The chrysanthemums that filled the planters on the busy street, however, were still very much enjoying the late summer sun. Esme found herself siding with the chrysanthemums. She was not ready for a new season. As she reached the bookshop a few minutes later, she saw a man dressed in a very expensive and bespoke suit. He was talking to a younger man, also in a suit, but not this bespoke sort, who was holding a clipboard. The expensive suited man appeared to be giving him instructions in a rather brash tone, and the younger man was nodding for his life, clearly wanting him to leave. Esme could tell this was a tense conversation that she wanted no part of. As she lifted her hand to open the door, the younger man stepped in and opened it for her. He looked relieved at the sudden interruption. "Excuse me, but who are you?" the bespoke suited man questioned, his eyes surveying her closely. "Esme, I work here," she replied, unnerved by his gaze. "Not for much longer," he quipped, seemingly pleased by his own wit. "I'm aware, sir." "That's what I like to hear. Someone with manners," he replied, breaking his gaze and looking back to the young man still holding the door. "If you don't mind, I need to get inside," Esme continued, stepping through the door. "Of course." He muttered something to the younger man, who then followed her inside, clipboard firmly in hand. "Ah, Mr. Brent, I presume," Mr. Goldstein called out from behind the counter. "Call me Andy," he replied, offering his hand. Esme placed the coffees on the counter, glad to no longer be carrying them. "Oh, what a treat! Are these from that new coffee shop?" Mrs. Goldstein inquired, reaching for one. "Yes. Oh, wait, not that one. This one," Esme replied, quickly handing him one of the plain lattes while she picked up her spice one. "Andy here is auditing our stock on behalf of the bank." "Oh, I see. Seems a bit premature, doesn't it?" We still have all week to sell books, she replied cheerfully. Well, yes, but we can keep a record of what we do sell, so Andy can take it off his list at the end of the week, can't we? I suppose. Just act like I'm not here. I'll stay out of your way, promise, Andy chirped, still clutching his clipboard like his life depended on it. Let me take you to the back. That's where we keep our newest acquisitions, Mr. Goldstein spoke, sadness apparent in his voice. As they left, Mrs. Goldstein appeared as if from nowhere. Esme, she smiled, bringing her in for a hug. Esme wasn't a hugger, but Mrs. Goldstein's hugs did seem to have an almost magical effect of calming her down when her anxiety was sky high. Oh, you've brought coffee. How lovely, she said, grabbing the last remaining takeaway cup from the holder. I think we are all in need of a little extra caffeine today. Esme took a sip of her own drink. Delicious autumnal notes of cinnamon, cloves and ginger hit her tongue, alongside plenty of sugar. It was delicious. Perhaps she was more ready for autumn than she had previously thought, and everything a new season could bring. Mr. Bespoke Suit Man disappeared from the front shortly after, leaving the four of them in the shop. It was a little busier than usual. Word had gotten around about the closure. Lana was right about the gossip between local businesses. And it seemed people were keen to see if this dusty little bookshop that they had never set foot in had any secret gems, or more likely, any discounts. Where are all your classics? A rather snooty woman asked Esme sometime later as she was sipping her third coffee of the day, despite the fact that it was only 10 a.m. She would regret drinking this much coffee later. Over there, Esme pointed. In times past, she would guide the customer to the exact spot, but that seemed pointless now. But you don't have any Chaucer, the woman bemoaned. I'm sorry, but we sold our last copies a week or so ago, and well, we aren't getting any more in, Esme replied, sadness in her voice. No wonder you're going under with no Chaucer in your classic selection, the woman said bitingly, before turning around and heading straight outside. Esme, could you help Andy with the top shelf books, please? Mr. Goldstein asked, popping his head around the door that separated the back of the shop from the main part. Only I don't like going up that ladder much with my knees, and I prefer the books were handled carefully. She hurried to the back and toward the door to the back room. Thank you, my dear. I'm just going to get us all some lunch. Be back shortly, he added as they passed each other. I told him I'd go up the ladder, Andy began. He was standing in the middle of the back room, clipboard in hand, looking at her. Don't take it personally. He's just very particular about books, especially these. They're some of our rarest and most expensive ones. We keep them back here so they don't get damaged by customers. Out of the corner of her eye, she spotted the oversized book from the delivery that she had laid out to inspect further, before completely forgetting about it amid everything that had happened. Esme was about to head for the ladder when she realised that the book was glowing. From the edges, a bright light was shining, and it was starting to levitate off the table. What on earth was going on? Was she seeing things now? What was even in that spice latte? Andy had noticed a look of confusion on her face and was starting to turn around. Instinctively, she reached for his shoulders to bring his attention back to her. Would you mind grabbing my coffee for me? I left it on the counter, Esme asked in an attempt to get him out of the way before he saw anything. Sure, no problem. I'll be right back, he replied. As soon as he left, Esme grabbed the book and climbed the rickety ladder. She had no idea what was going on, but the book had at least stopped glowing once she picked it up. She longed to investigate it further, but her only option right now was to hide it. There was a hatch in the ceiling that led to some old vents, the perfect hiding spot. Esme lifted the cover, put the book inside, making sure to push it down into the vent a little in case it started glowing again, then carefully replaced the cover before climbing back down. For some inexplicable reason, Esme felt as though Andy shouldn't have this book. It wasn't his, and not because it had been glowing and levitating just 5 minutes ago. "It's mine," kept repeating in her head, and she couldn't argue with herself, at least not right now. Esme could hear Andy walking back. She quickly filled her arms with books from the lower shelves to look as though she had been gathering them the whole time. Her heart was pounding. Had any of this happened? Was the stress getting to her? Regardless, the book was safely tucked away, waiting for her. As Esme handed the books she had gathered up to Andy, she realised she didn't feel guilty about hiding the book. She thought she probably ought to, but it was a sort of theft after all. She shook her head. The bank was taking more than enough from them. They weren't having her book too.